How are you doing this morning, Jeppe?
Yeah, I'm fine, thanks. It's a little humid today, but other than that, the Danish summer is okay for now, I think. Yeah. And
Yeah,
yourself?
you're in the other part of Denmark.
Yeah, exactly. Northern part.
Uh,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. All good here. Thanks.
so let me just share my screen here for a second. This is a post you made to LinkedIn that I thought we could use as a kind of framework for our conversation today.
Sure,
And,
sure. Yeah,
and you raise seven, I think, very good points about how AI are used in education and how these trends might be slightly concerning. So I'll
yeah,
just read them up here, and we don't have to go through them one by one. We'll just talk with this as a framework. So one, AI assisted grading. Two, chatbots as kings of learning. Three, assuming everything ed is scalable. Four, building endless AI prompt repositories. Five, increasing reliance on AI for tasks that develop critical thinking. Six, surrendering institutional strategic planning to big tech companies. And seven, believing AI ed evangelists who claim more tech solves all educational challenges. Mind the gap.
yeah.
So, what inspired you to write these posts, or this post in particular?
I just wanted to provoke a bit of dialogue, given that in recent months, I think the tendency has been to focus on some of all of these trends, and not always in a very positive way. For instance, you have providers such as Khan Academy and others who generally believe and sell the idea that education is truly scalable, which may or may not be the case, but there are certain pitfalls at least that we have to be mindful of. So I just wanted to spark a bit of dialogue, and I think that that post did just that actually quite well. So that was a fun one to write, I think. Yeah.
Mm. And I think you hit the nail on point with some of these. For instance, AI assisted grading. Let me just play the devil's advocate for a minute here. Let's say that students use ChatGPT to write essays and take home assignments. Why should teachers not be allowed to use AI for grading?
Yeah, I suppose I mean, if we have a situation where teachers use AI to set the task and students use AI to answer the task or write the project or whatever the case may be, and then you have teachers using AI as assistants to grade the papers, then where is really the value added in that process? I suppose we have to ask now. So while generative AI can certainly assist with many tasks, we really do have to be mindful of how and why we educate more generally, and then maybe reconsider the exam forms and the overwhelming demand we have on output in education in the way education has been constructed and set up for the last, well, hundreds of years, really. So generative generative AI really pushes all the boundaries of the logics we have around education. And that's really not to say that we should throw it all away and start over, as some people advocate for. I don't believe that at all. I think there are so many good things that we do and we have been doing in education. It has been a source to growth and productivity and, well, societies that prosper, basically. So we have to be really careful not to do away with all that, but we also really have to be careful not to insist on the same forms and structures as we've known for decades, because generative AI really pushes the boundaries of our understanding of what education is and should be. Yeah.
Hmm. And generative AI, it's also very tempting to use it in an educational setting because the education sector in many countries are overburdened. There's not a lot of resources. Teachers are stressed out. So in theory, it would be very easy to implement something like ChatGPT just as a way of taking the pressure off students and teachers as well. So that's might be dangerous.
Yeah, but you do have a point in that in societies where the teacher shortage is so critical that there are none, then maybe some kind of virtual assistance is better than nothing. I mean, if that's the scenario, then definitely. But the whole AI will replace teachers dialogue that's been going on as well. I don't really buy into that either because there are so many good things teachers do. Relations between people, leading the classroom, and so on and so forth, that it will be very hard for generative AI to replace. And kids, I suppose it also really depends on if we're talking about younger learners or mature students or students who go to college or whatever the level and the subject and all that. So we have to also be careful not to talk about generative AI as one thing. It's really a situational technology where you have to take into account the specific setting of what you do. But it can certainly be a help in countries and in situations where the stress on teachers is quite enormous, and there is no alternative. I completely get that. But in countries where there may be a shortage of teachers, but it's not quite as critical, we have to, I think, find ways for generative AI to support teachers in doing some of the work that's more redundant and lower level, coordinating meetings, drafting newsletters, whatever the case may be, stuff like that, communications. So that frees up time for the core task of actually being with the kids or being with the students and delivering higher or the same quality in the educational setting. So it's a complicated answer, and it's very much depends on the situation, and the context.
Something I was thinking about while preparing for my talk here with you is whether higher education and elementary school and primary school and so on is different from each other when it comes to adoption of AI. I imagine that when people go to university, they are usually adults, usually have developed some critical thinking skills. So AI adoption might not be as, what can we say, impactful on their brains as the case is with young students who are still, gaining an identity and that kind of stuff. Do you
Yeah,
think we should approach AI differently in higher education compared to high school and elementary school?
I think that distinction is quite important, but I also think there's, as I said before, distinctions between subjects, that some types of study, some exam forms, whatever the case may be, are better suited to be supported by generative AI than others. But I think also it's quite important, as you say, that young learners shouldn't primarily be preoccupied with technology, but with being kids and having fun and playing and taking that approach to learning. Now, generative AI may be able to assist in those endeavors as well, but it very much it would have to be adult led and driven by adults, and not just set loose and let's see what happens. Is sort of my approach to that. But then in higher education, I suppose we have a different kind of problem if we talk about, for instance, writing specifically. Writing is, I think, a very key skill to learn, also for young learners. But we also see a world in which younger learners basically talk to their phones. They don't write as much as before. So where does that leave writing and even handwriting? I mean, and I'm not saying that should go away at all. That's not my argument. I think there are some very fine tactile things for kids to learn to write, for instance. I'm no expert on that, but that certainly has great value. But maybe more to say that when you then reach the higher levels of education, maybe the component where you write for an exam or sit an exam that has to be based on writing you produce, that's very hard to combine with where we are with generative AI even now, and that's why we see more and more schools and universities focusing on shall we say portfolios and process driven work where you sort of document and talk about and discuss the ways you've interacted with generative AI to reach the results you have as a final output, and then that's a more interesting discussion to have than whether or not you've cheated and actually get to that result by yourself, or you've been assisted along the way. If you can demonstrate the critical thinking skills, then you'll be fine. So I think that'll be a change in higher education for sure in the years to come. Yeah.
Right. Because writing is also learning to write is also learning how to think. I can't remember who made this quote, but someone said that clear writing and clear thinking are practically inseparable. It's the same thing. So by teaching students how to write, you also teach them how to reflect and think critically about the world and so forth. So I agree that writing skills are one of those skills. It's very empowering to learn, and it would be certainly a pity if AI became used too much for writing, especially in like school context. But that being said, we have guys like Ethan Mollick, who you and I both know. He's a very famous Substack writer who writes about how AI can be used in higher education. One of his themes is prompt engineering. He talks a lot about how he shares these long prompts that students can use to make assignments and teachers can use. And he's generally very optimistic about AI's function in schools and universities. Do you think that prompt engineering and training in how to prompt should be a part of the school schedule in higher education or in high school?
I think gaining familiarity with the technology is quite important in all subjects. So whether it should be a separate subject that teaches that as a core skill, like this science of philosophy, I mean, that's one way to go. Another way to go, of course, is to integrate it into already existing subjects and then give it the dimension how to apply the technology in that specific context. I would be very careful to go all in on prompt engineering. I think it's a little bit silly in some ways, the focus it has gained. I mean, the whole approach to how we interact with the technology right now already seems a bit old-fashioned to me, a bit dated. It's a bit like the old cell phones where you had like 128 punches you could enter, and then you had to, if you wanted an S on the keyboard, you had to hit a certain key 4 times, and then it got stuck, and then all those type of things. I mean, that's the way this technology feels to me now. Of course, we did use those phones, and we do use this technology, and it's great. But I think in a few years we'll be looking at this whole prompt engineering and just say, well, what were they thinking? I mean, it's a bit crazy. I think it can be done much more simple than those endlessly long prompts where you have to take all sorts of things into account. For me, and the experience I have also delivering workshops and so on, is to do it more iteratively, like as a dialogue. Try something, it doesn't work, try something else. And of course, it's always good to sort of give some context and set the task and, give input to what kind of output you want. I mean, that's certainly helpful, but I think it's generally more helpful to treat the technology like a person. Endlessly clever and silly and stupid person that's biased and all that, we know that, but I would be, as I said, hesitant to go into sort of prompt engineering for everyone. I mean, this is a specialized field of study, and I fully respect that. There are engineers who spend decades on this before it got mainstream. That's fine. They should absolutely do prompt engineering and whatever. But for you and I and everyone else, I think a bit of, shall we say, common sense and a more practical approach is much more helpful than tucking it into something very complicated that's very difficult to use, because then we won't get the adoption rate we need in education and elsewhere.
Completely agree. Your second point is that schools should not treat ChatGPT as king. And I think I know exactly what you mean. You mean that we should be careful not to let AI take the driver's seat in education. For instance, let's say that a teacher use a chatbot to write a curriculum for students. Then suddenly the teacher is no longer in control. And I also see this as a concerning trend. And it's really something that the big tech companies want to push on us, because
Yeah.
they want us to give out control to them and to the AI models.
Yeah, and the whole idea of customizing chatbots and setting them up and using your own, shall we say, curriculum or predefined base of text should concern you, I suppose, as a lawyer as well, because I mean, where does that leave publishing houses and all those types of questions then pop up as well? So that's one thing, but also, as you point out, it'll be sort of a mental offloading of responsibility in front of the students, potentially at least. Of course, you can do this in a clever way and do it as an assistant to what you do in the classroom, and that can be fine. But maybe back to my point about prompt engineering before, I think also the whole idea about customizing chatbots, is it really that interesting? I mean, now we have that technology, we have that possibility, but why chatbots? I mean, if chatbots were really that interesting, we would have had chatbots 10 years ago or 15 years ago. We had chatbots, but to a different extent in education. So I think it's also, that's the technology we have at hand. So that's what we do. That's what we're using. But come on, I mean, who really wants to interact with technology like that when you study for something? I mean, so yeah, just my personal opinion again. But I think time will show us that chatbots really wasn't the answer to enhancing education as well long term. It's fine for now, but it won't last. Is my take on that.
So you work at a Danish university called Aalborg University as the head of administration of the clinical medicine department, as far as I recall.
Yeah.
Do you feel the influence of tech companies in your day-to-day job?
No. I think we have to be mindful that the Danish education system is somewhat different from most other countries in the world in terms of it being a public sector. So all the universities in Denmark are basically, well, accredited by the state and essentially run by the state. They're independent institutions, but they're state funded. And so we don't get the kind of pressure from private contractors as you do in many other places in the US and Asia and so on. And even if we did, it would be on the university as a whole, on the IT department, I presume, and not on a department level. But ed tech is big in the world, around the world, and the pressure is real. That's for sure. Yeah.
And it's also very hard to say no to these guys like Microsoft and Google and Meta. We use their computers, we use their software. We are like completely embedded in them everywhere we go. So whatever they want to push at us, it's hard to say no to.
Oh yeah, we definitely have that. And now I'm not speaking on behalf of Aalborg University, but rather as someone looking at the sector more broadly. But we certainly do have a big influence from Microsoft in that sense, right? That the systems we use in many Danish educational institutions are the Microsoft products. So, and it has been like that for a very long time. So of course there's some weight in that relationship for most schools. Yeah, that's true. And as you say, Google Chromebooks and so on in elementary schools. So yeah, in that sense, it's certainly present in Denmark as well. I thought you meant more new tech companies approaching schools.
Mm.
We don't have too much of that, but we certainly have the same kind of IT infrastructure benefits and problems, I would say, as most other schools in the world. Yeah.
Mm. And that's the advantage with having a very public school system, that the process for new software and IT hardware is not the same as for private schools. It's a bit more complex.
Yeah, and it has advantages and disadvantages. I think we're very lucky that we have a high degree of we have a very high focus on compliance and doing things right and getting it right and not compromising data and ethics, which is quite easy to do if you make fast solutions. The downside, as in any other big institution, any other society, public sector, even big private companies, is that when you go big or when you have something that has to include a lot of people, it tends to be a bit slow. So
Mm.
that's certainly a compromise I'm very happy to make. Not that I have a choice, but I'm very happy with the way things are run in that way. Yeah.
Mm. Me too. I went to a panel debate a few months ago at an IT security conference in Copenhagen, where they talked about the Google Chromebook case, which you also briefly mentioned. And there's a lot of focus on the Danish education systems, very dependence on Microsoft and so forth, especially the Google Chromebook case, as you mentioned before, where a certain municipality in Denmark banned the use of Google Chromebooks because of data ethical concerns.
Yeah.
One of those talking points at the panel debate was that perhaps Denmark could develop our own operating system, and in that way be independent from Google and Microsoft. They said that in France, they did that recently. They use open source tools to build their own kind of operating system for students. So they were completely independent from the tech giants. Do you have any read about where Denmark is in this context? Do you think this is something we could look into over the next couple of years?
Yeah, perhaps we really have to be mindful with the data. I mean, that's the main currency, isn't it? And in education, we manage a lot of people's data and have to keep that secure. Just like municipalities and other public entities. So whether or not the solution is to develop our own system, I'm no tech expert to that level certainly. But I think it's definitely worth considering and looking into. Just as I would say, also developing our own large language model or something like that to also give it, Denmark is a small area, a small language area. So linguistically, we also run some risks, I would say, in just relying on big tech and the way things are going. It's like we're in the car and we're not driving the car. We have perhaps the option to put on a driver's seatbelt, maybe, but where the car is going and how fast we can't really control. So that's kind of the state of things right now. So, but I count myself lucky also to be in a country where the new EU Act and so on are in place. I mean, I think there are a lot of benefits to living in a part of the world where private security is taken quite seriously as we go forward, especially perhaps. So didn't quite answer your question, I suppose, but
It's a difficult question.
it
So
is, yeah.
I would be surprised if you could give a very straight answer.
Yeah, we'll
But
see.
uh, but yeah, it's you're right. I feel the same way. It can be annoying sometimes with all the laws from EU. On the other hand,
Yeah,
it's so important,
yeah.
and I'm very grateful for it as well.
I do think generally that more open source would be good for many things. And people tend to get the whole open source concept a bit backwards sometimes. That some people tend to think that that means that everything is out in the open, all your data is out in the open. But that's not really the case. It's more that if there's a glitch in your programming or something, then everyone can assist, and you can yeah, get help from much more people than you could if you relied on one provider or one tech company. So it has tremendous benefits, the way I see it, at least. So I think that's certainly in many ways something we could look more into as a society. Yeah,
And most importantly, we also have ownership. So
exactly.
Microsoft or Google is not going to knock on our doors and give us some crazy terms that we are forced to agree to because we are dependent on them. So
Exactly.
that's main advantage also.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
So you say that tech does not solve educational challenges. What will?
What will? Well, several things, I suppose. One thing has to do with resources. That there's enough teachers. I mean, that's something I do think can be solved to an extent. It's a pretty complicated discussion about the reputation of the trade and stuff like that. So that's certainly one thing. But I also think reorientation in education towards technology. I mean, we come at big tech a bit in this talk as well, and I think that's absolutely appropriate. But I also think there's an element where schools and school systems and educational systems haven't really adapted to the new reality as quickly as we could have hoped. And so I mean, there's a pressure from the outside, but there's also pressure from the inside to actually say, okay, now things are getting serious, people. We need to adapt to this new reality. Um, yeah, so but it's tricky, isn't it? Because one of the true values and trademarks of education is consistency and quality and those types of things that you don't get if you navigate towards new tech all the time. That's really about the long haul for the students to ensure quality. So there are some good rationales why things work the way they work. But we do need to be a bit more innovative and risk-taking in education as well to meet tech halfway there, I would say, and to ensure that we actually get our say in what education is and should be, and not leave it to tech to decide, because that will happen if we don't sort of invite ourselves to the party and get going on this agenda as well. So yeah, so there are numerous kinds of answers, but I think the most sort of predominant strategic point for me would be that educators and leaders in higher education need to um, get more on board with the most recent developments in generative AI, for instance, and then sort of lean into that and start making those decisions for the future. Yeah.
I spoke with Leon Furs a couple of weeks ago, who is an Australian expert in AI's impact on education. He is specialized in the secondary, like high school students, uh, and and below age-wise. And he said that many of the younger students tend to think that AI is a bit cringe, while we
Yeah.
discuss AI as either like it has huge potential or it's going to be the end for all of us. students are a bit more neutral about it and don't really think it's that exciting. It's more like, how
Yeah.
about the university students? Do you have an impression of how they regard this technology? Are they embracing it, or are they not really caring about it? Or what's the situation?
University students, or
Hmm.
um, I think it's well, in my experience, it's pretty much distributed like the population at whole. So some people are scared of technology and won't use it in assignments because they're afraid to do something wrong. Some people are beginning to explore it a little bit, and some people are all in and are just, going full in on AI adoption for education and for personal reasons as well, and work and everything else. So, but I think the point you raise about younger people, younger generations, not really, so to say, appreciating the full impact of generative AI has to do also with what we talked about before about prompt engineering and prompting and those types of things. Um, that's certainly part of it, at least. I'm looking forward to seeing the Apple launch in their ecosystem shortly, because while Apple is not typically known for being at the cutting edge of technology, they are quite known for doing good integrations. And I think when it begins to pop up on your iPhone and stuff like that, in I would imagine very useful use cases for you, then things might begin to change. But we'll see about that, I suppose, quite shortly in the coming
Hmm.
months. Yeah,
Yeah, the impact of that will be very interesting to observe.
yeah,
It's
definitely.
actually quite difficult to comprehend how a company like Meta have pushed these AI chatbots to Facebook and Instagram users. I've never used them, but I've read about it and heard from other people how it works. And the same thing with Snapchat. They also have this
Yeah,
My AI Snapchat feature. And it's very hard to understand how these companies would think that it's a great idea and that is something that kids would enjoy to use.
yeah,
It seems pretty pointless. It's just pure data harvesting and conversations with a chatbot, you know?
yeah, yeah. Yeah, and also the space is just so dense. You have so many providers, more and more every day, doing basically the same kind of thing. So where's the edge in your product? I mean, over the competitors. And we see it also with the launch of new levels of LLMs all the time, right? The competition is really ongoing and quite fierce. And I suppose that's good in some ways, but it's also a tremendous pressure on ethics, on the environment, on so many other things that we may not have time to unpack today. But it's certainly not uncomplicated, this development from societal perspective as well. Yeah,
That's also why it's very difficult to trust some of these companies with the responsibilities to build tech that is going to shape students and
yeah,
contribute to their learnings. It seems like they have no social understanding of how people communicate with each other and how the world works. They
yeah,
might be very good at technology, but they're not really good at worldly stuff.
exactly. Yeah.
Okay, Jeppe, I think I will leave it at that. I want to thank you for your time today.
Well, it's been a pleasure talking to you. Definitely. So thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Likewise, bye bye.
Have a good one. Bye.